I want you to imagine, just for a second, holding the most powerful tool ever created by human hands. Like, this isn't just a heavy piece of machinery. This is something that allows you to manipulate the fundamental building blocks of reality.
Oh, yeah. Like literal godlike power.
Exactly. With this tool, you can cure genetic diseases. You can build materials that are, lighter than paper but stronger than steel. You can connect to any mind on the planet in a fraction of a second. But, and here's the terrifying catch when you open the box, there is no instruction manual.
None at all.
No manual for how to use it safely. No ethical guidelines, no moral guardrails, just raw, unadulterated power.
It's a really haunting image, and I think it captures the central tension of our scientific age perfectly, because we actually have acquired these capabilities that previous generations would have thought were magic, but we're increasingly operating them without the moral compass that historical ancient traditions used to provide.
Right. Which brings us to the profound question we're exploring in today's deep dive. Can we extract the ancient sort of operating system of human civilization, the ethics, the community, the legal frameworks that were historically provided by religion without actually needing to believe in the supernatural?
It's a massive question.
It is. And to get to the bottom of this, we're looking through a very specific stack of sources. We have this fascinating book called God Index, From Myth to System, which is this deeply rationalist, modern interpretation of Judaism. We've also got essays from the legendary physicist Richard Feynman and an academic paper on the bioethics of nanotechnology.
Which is going to ground this whole theoretical discussion in a very urgent modern reality.
Yeah.
I do want to give a quick disclaimer to you, the listener, right up front. These authors are navigating some intense friction between secular and religious worldview.
Oh, definitely.
But our aim in this deep dive isn't to validate one side over the other or tell anyone what to believe. We are completely impartial here. Our focus is entirely on unpacking the functional architecture of the systems these authors propose.
Yeah, we're just here to look at the blueprints. So I want to start with that idea of the tool without a manual, because our sources highlight a historical moment where this exact scenario played out. Back in 1959, Richard Feynman gave this famous speech called Plenty of Room at the Bottom.
Such a classic. He essentially outlined the theoretical physics for nanotechnology, right? The ability to manipulate matter at the scale of individual atoms.
Exactly. He was basically charting the course for the next century of science. And the bioethics paper we have details how completely his vision has actually been realized today. I mean, we're working at a scale of 1 to 100 nanometers now.
And at that size, physics gets weird. Quantum mechanics take over.
Totally. We've developed these things called polymeric nanoparticles. They can be injected into the bloodstream, navigate your body completely undetected by the immune system, cross the blood-brain barrier, and literally deliver highly targeted tumor-shrinking drugs right into cancerous cells.
It's miraculous, honestly. But the paper is also super clear about the dark side of that exact same mechanism.
Right, the double-edged sword.
Yeah, because if you can deliver a life-saving drug undetected, well, you can also deliver a synthesized neurotoxin undetected. You can engineer materials that fundamentally alter human biology, and suddenly you're blurring the line between medical healing and, military-grade biological enhancement.
Which is terrifying, and the science just advanced at breakneck speed. But Feynman's 1959 speech, the one that kickstarted all this, it had a glaring omission. He gave us the theoretical blueprint for the ultimate tool, but he offered literally zero framework for how to govern it ethically.
Right. No instruction manual.
Yeah.
And he actually realized this oversight later in his career. His later essays show this brilliant physicist really wrestling with the limits of his own discipline. Because science, he points out, is fundamentally just a method of inquiry driven by the question, if I do X, what will happen?
Try it to see.
Exactly. It's an engine of empirical testing.
So you can ask the scientific method, if I engineer this nanoparticle to cross the blood-brain barrier, what's the physiological response? And it will give you an objective answer.
A completely objective answer, yeah.
But you cannot ask science, should I engineer this nanoparticle? It's completely unequipped to determine the moral value of an action.
Because science is descriptive. It maps the physical terrain.
Yeah.
But deciding where we ought to go on that map, or, how we treat each other along the journey, that requires a totally different mechanism. And Feynman recognized that historically, human societies relied on religion to supply those directional answers.
Right. And he actually divided the function of religion into three interconnected parts, which I found fascinating: the metaphysical, the ethical, and the inspirational.
Yeah, let's break this down.
So the metaphysical covers the origin stories, right? The creation myths, the literal properties of a divine creator. The ethical is the moral code, the rules of engagement, distributing resources, the golden rule, that kind of thing. And then the inspiration, this is the psychological drive, the emotional comfort, and the awe that actually motivates a person to follow the ethical code, even when it's hard or requires personal sacrifice.
And the dilemma Feynman points out here is so crucial. The relentless questioning nature of the scientific method naturally erodes that metaphysical component for a lot of modern people.
Yeah, empirical observation challenges the literal creation myths.
Right, the metaphysical foundation cracks. But the unintended consequence, and this is the danger, is that when the metaphysical collapses, it accidentally drags the inspirational component down with it.
Because the inspiration was so deeply tangled up with the belief in the myth. Like if a person stops believing that a divine entity is actively watching them and weighing their actions, their emotional tether to the moral code just frays.
Exactly. The ethical rule, like act with justice, might still make logical sense on paper, but the psychological engine that drives them to actually practice it goes quiet.
They're just left holding this list of demands without the internal motivation to execute them. It honestly makes me think of modern science as the engine of a high-performance car.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Thanks. I mean, it gives us incredible forward momentum. We're hurtling forward with AI, gene editing, nanotech. But in our obsession with building a faster engine, we've basically dismantled the steering wheel, the ethical frameworks that historically kept us from driving off a cliff.
And we're going really, really fast.
Very fast. So if the metaphysical magic is what originally gave humans the inspiration to cooperate, are we just totally doomed to moral chaos without it?
Well, this is exactly the crisis that the God Index attempts to resolve. But the author makes a really bold argument here. They say that to salvage the steering wheel without relying on the supernatural, we have to investigate why human beings built the metaphysical in the first place.
Right. We have to pivot from physics to neuroscience.
Exactly. We have to look at human cognition. The book points out this massive paradigm shift in how we understand the brain. Historically, we thought the brain was reactive. Light hits the eye, brain processes it, figures out what to do.
It's just a standard input-output machine.
Right. But modern cognitive science reveals it's the complete opposite. The brain is actually a predictive organ.
Wait, predictive? How does that work?
Well, think about it. Your brain is locked inside a dark, silent skull, right? It only receives electrical impulses. If it waited for sensory information to be fully processed before deciding how to react, you'd be too slow to survive.
Oh, wow.
So it constantly constructs these internal simulated models of the world. It anticipates patterns before the data even arrives. It's a prediction engine trying to minimize surprise.
Okay, and the book ties this to a specific byproduct called pareidolia. This is the brain's automatic mechanism for imposing recognizable forms onto, like, ambiguous stimuli. It's why you look at a cloud and see a face or hear a hidden message in static.
The brain absolutely hates ambiguity. It aggressively imposes coherence.
Right, but the evolutionary logic here's what blew my mind. Imagine an early human walking through the tall grass of the savannah. The grass rustles. If their predictive brain imposes a pattern, says, it's a predator, and they run away, but it was just the wind. The cost is really low.
Yeah, they just burned a few calories running.
Exactly. But if they assume it's just the wind and they fail to impose a pattern and it actually is a predator, they die. The cost is fatal.
Our brains are biologically hardwired to overassign meaning and agency to chaotic events. It's a much safer survival strategy to assume a pattern exists than to miss a real threat.
Okay, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener, though. Are we essentially concluding that the entire history of human religion is just one giant collective hallucination, like an evolutionary coping mechanism for early humans who were scared of thunderstorms?
I mean, it is so easy to reduce it to that. But the God Index argues that viewing it that way completely misses the functional brilliance of what was actually happening.
How so?
Put yourself in their environment. Ancient societies faced overwhelming uncertainty. Sudden droughts, mysterious plagues, violent weather. Their predictive brains desperately needed to find coherence.
Yeah.
Since they didn't have modern meteorology or germ theory, they constructed narratives.
They built metaphysical frameworks.
Exactly. To transform unpredictable chaos into an interpretable structure.
So personifying the storm as an angry deity wasn't random irrationality. It was cognitive infrastructure. Suddenly, the storm had rules. It could be appeased through ritual. It gave them an illusion of control that stopped mass panic.
It was a necessary survival technology, and the experiences generated within these early systems were psychologically real to them. If your predictive model tells you a divine presence is providing order, your brain genuinely perceives that meaning.
And that perception of causality allowed early humans to cooperate in much larger groups. Which brings us to how this scales up from the individual brain to an entire society.
Yes, the systems engineering part. The God index relies on Richard Dawkins here, specifically his concept of the meme.
Not internet memes.
No. In evolutionary biology, a gene is biological information that replicates. A meme is a unit of cultural information that replicates. A melody, a ritual, a behavioral rule.
That memes spread from mind to mind, but the key insight is that a meme doesn't survive for thousands of years because it's objectively scientifically true. It survives because it's highly effective at replicating and binding human groups together. It creates social cohesion.
And this is the exact lens the God index uses to completely redefine Judaism. It argues that viewing Judaism merely as a theology, just as a set of supernatural beliefs, is a reductive, modern mistake. Judaism, the book proposes, is actually a civilizational system.
A civilizational system. I love that phrasing. It's this integrated architecture of law, historical memory, shared ethics, education. It's what allowed a specific group to survive millennia of exile.
Yes, and when you look at the tradition through that lens, the rituals stop looking like arbitrary obedience to a king in the sky. They reveal their function as social infrastructure.
Like Shabbat, the day of rest.
Exactly. In a systemic view, Shabbat isn't just a rule about not working. It's a mechanism that synchronizes time across a dispersed community. It forces a weekly reset that prioritizes family and social bonds over pure economic output.
And dietary laws, kashrut, they aren't just random food restrictions. They're daily actions that reinforce identity boundaries. And then the most complex piece of this is halakha, the body of Jewish law.
Which is fascinating because in pre-modern times, there was no distinction between religious and secular law. Halakha governed everything: property disputes, agriculture, mourning, commerce. It was the complete operating system.
It was the code. And the brilliance of it is how it handled adaptation. The Talmud isn't a finalized, static rulebook. It's a multi-generational record of legal reasoning. It intentionally preserves minority opinions and dissenting arguments.
It's essentially version control for civilizational software.
Yes. By preserving the dissenting opinions, if the environment changed, say, they lost their agricultural land and were forced into urban exile, future jurists could look back at the logic and adapt the law to the new reality.
It assumed the world would change. But the book points out the system is currently facing a massive threat. The author calls it dormancy.
Dormancy. Form without function.
Right. It happens when a society keeps performing the rituals mechanically, preserving the outward form, but they completely lose the intelligibility of the function. They forget why the system was built.
Let's bring this back to our nanotechnology dilemma. If the system is suffering from dormancy, it can't process the ethics of, say, polymeric nanoparticles.
Not at all.
You see, secular folks look at this massive halakhic code, they don't get the utility, so they treat it like legacy software and hit delete. Meanwhile, hyper-traditionalists refuse to update the code at all. They run it blindly, treating every historical bug as a divine feature.
Both approaches fail to engage with what the software was actually designed to do, which is to navigate complex ethical landscapes. When you lose the intelligibility of the system, polarization is the inevitable result.
So to fix the system, the God Index proposes something really radical. We have to reinterpret the central concept, the concept of the divine itself.
And to do this, the author reaches way back to the 12th century philosopher Maimonides.
The idea of negative theology, right?
Yes. Maimonides argued that human beings cannot define what God is, only what God is not. Because if you say God is wise or God sees, you're applying human traits to the infinite. You shrink the divine down to a very limited human scale.
Okay, so the God Index takes Maimonides' rejection of a human-like deity and pushes it into the vocabulary of modern complexity science. It asks this incredible question: what if God is not an external agent intervening in reality? What if God is an emergent state of coherence within a civilization?
An emergent state of coherence.
Break that down for us. How does an emergent state actually work?
So in systems theory, an emergent property is a new characteristic that arises when individual parts interact. The property doesn't exist in the parts themselves. Think of water. One oxygen atom isn't wet. One hydrogen atom isn't wet.
Wetness is the emergent property of their interaction.
Precisely. The book argues that when a society aligns its behavior according to principles of justice, mutual responsibility, and deep ethical cohesion, a powerful structural reality emerges.
And the ancient architects used the word God to describe that emergent reality.
Yes. Look at how traditional concepts map onto this. When ancient texts say a corrupt society suffers divine punishment or exile through a systems lens, what's happening? They eroded their social trust. The mathematical consequence of a low-trust system is polarization and collapse.
And conversely, blessing or redemption isn't magic. It's the systemic resilience and cooperation that naturally emerges from high ethical alignment. God becomes a way to describe the highest collective values that organize human behavior.
And this totally solves the Feynman problem. It allows a modern scientific person to integrate into the ancient operating system consciously.
Right. Without suppressing the rationality, the ritual remains sacred not because of a supernatural command, but because it builds civilizational coherence. And I keep coming back to this, do we lose the spiritual magic? Does understood participation actually feel as comforting as believing someone is watching over you?
It's a shift, definitely. But the author argues it expands the spiritual experience. The sensations of awe, of transcendence, of participating in a massive human project of survival, those remain entirely real. The mechanisms just became intelligible.
Science isn't a threat to the tradition anymore. It's the tool to understand its brilliance. It bridges the gap. We started with Feynman's powerful tool lacking a manual. Science gave us the engine but stripped away the steering wheel.
But we don't have to throw away the steering wheel just because we discovered it was engineered by human minds. We can consciously use that ancient ethical infrastructure to govern our modern scientific engine.
There's this beautiful metaphor at the end of the book. The traditional person sees God from behind through mystery and inherited tradition. The secular person attempts to see God face to face through science and systems theory.
But they are both observing the exact same structural reality from opposite directions.
The human search for coherence. It's an operating system built by human cognition to manage vulnerability. Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on.
What's that?
Well, we're currently handing our predictive processing over to artificial intelligence. Algorithms are predicting our behavior, managing our infrastructure. If human civilizational coherence was the original emergent property we called God, what happens when machines take over the prediction engine?
Wow. Will the next God be an emergent property of our machines?
Exactly. Or will we find a way to encode our own hard-won human coherence into the algorithms we're writing today?
I mean, we've spent thousands of years developing the instruction manual. I guess the challenge of the next century is teaching our tools how to read it.